All right. I think we're going to go ahead and jump on in. Again, for those of you who are just now getting into the meeting, good morning. So nice to see everyone today for our first fall webinar for this school year. And as you can see, we are going to be looking at rhetoric support for the 2023 South Carolina College and Career Ready ELA standards. My name is Casey Prince Harvey, and I am Education Associate for Humanities and ELA Support in the Office of Assessment and Standards. And I am joined today by my awesome colleagues, Mandy Hawker, our elementary ELA Education Associate. Also, we have Tabitha Hughes, our middle level ELA Education Associate, and Brenna McCormick, who is our secondary ELA Education Associate. So we've got a full team here. Happy to see you. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. You're going to see some links drop in the chat momentarily. First, you will see our attendance form, followed by a rhetoric landing page, which some of you may have already gotten in your email, but it's going to go back in the chat. Question link. We have a Google form specifically for any questions you have around rhetoric today. I know we're on a tight time frame, so if there are any questions that we can go back specifically and answer, we would love to see those on our form. And then lastly, our note catcher, which is also on our landing page, but just so you have it, you will see there are going to be a couple of pencil icons on the screen throughout the session. That means that we're going to do stop and jots or just some quick note taking. You'll also see an icon of two people talking. That is a slide that indicates there's going to be an engagement of some sort. So looking for some responses in the chat or even to unmute. And then we'll have a couple of teacher behaviors, so modeling strategies that you might take back and use with your learners or your teachers if you're coming from a district capacity. And then again, if there are questions along the way, we have that Google form, but if there's anything in the chat that we can specifically answer as well, we're happy to do that. And that's going to take us to our introductions. Well, actually, no, our purpose first, sorry. So we have three purposes today. First, to guide participants through the 2023 standards, to help participants locate and navigate the rhetoric support document, and then lastly, to guide participants through the instructional resources for rhetoric, and then to provide an overview of how they can be used to support planning and instruction. That takes us to our introductions. So in the chat, we would love to hear your name, district, and because it's now fall, we'd love to hear your favorite fall read. I know when I was in the classroom, one of my favorite things to teach during the fall was The Wife Story by Ursula K. Le Guin. Really great twist at the end. It's got kind of that interesting, not exactly spooky element, but just enough to get you on the edge of your seat. So let me know what your favorite fall read is, and my colleagues are going to be sharing that out through the chat. Oh, I just saw The Crucible. I love seeing my high school people. Oh, A Separate Peace. Pit and the Pendulum. Oh, just about anything Edgar Allan Poe, right? That's when you start pulling out your Poe stories. The Witch's Brew. And these could even be your personal favorite fall reads as well. I'm loving these responses. Oh my gosh, The Witches. Lots of great stuff here. Just taking a look. A little old lady who wasn't afraid of anything. I'm going to need to take her advice. Oh, The Cask of Amontillado. How many seeds in a pumpkin? I don't think I've heard of that one. feel like I'm way behind on the chat here. I'm like scrolling and everyone's putting in so many great things. All right. So who are we? Well, first off, we are the Office of Assessment and Standards. We work specifically on the standards side. So dealing with the review, revision, approval, and implementation of our standards, specifically our ELA standards. Also within our office is assessment development. So they work specifically on the assessment side, but we focus specifically on our standards. We are also your partners. We are here to work alongside you. We know that you are the experts in the field. And so we are here to support you in whatever ways we can, specifically around the standards. And specifically right now, considering that we have new standards. All right, so let's do a little pre-assessment here as we're thinking about rhetoric and your level of comfort around the concept of rhetoric. So I want you to pop in the chat where you're at as a level 1, 2, or 3. 1 being this is a new concept for you. 2, maybe you have some experience, but you're eager to learn more. And then all the way to 3, where you feel confident in your ability to teach or support this instruction if you are coming from like a district level or support position.
Lots of 1s and 2s, Casey.
Okay. And that's okay if you're a 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
I would expect quite possibly my high school teachers, my AP Lang teachers specifically, to be maybe at that 3, which is also fantastic. But if you're a 1 or 2, that is perfectly fine. And hopefully by the end of today, you feel a little bit more confident in those abilities and feel ready to provide support, whether that is to your learners or that is to teachers in your district. So we'll go ahead and jump on in. Diving into rhetoric. So before we get into the standards, I want us to think about rhetoric overall. So we'll take a minute. This is on your note catcher. I'd like you to put it on your note catcher first before we add to the chat. How do you define rhetoric? So your own personal definition, or what do you associate with the term rhetoric? Let's take just a minute to write it on your note catcher, or if you have a notebook where you're preferring to write things, that's fine. And then in about a minute, I'll ask you to add your responses to the chat. So not looking for a right answer, just your own thoughts right now. Take just a minute. All right. So let's go ahead and add some responses to the chat. You don't have to add an answer to both of these, but maybe you want to pick one in the chat. Either how did you personally define rhetoric, or what do you associate with the term rhetoric? Okay, one of my colleagues, can you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in the chat?
Yeah, so the art of
Persuasive.
persuasion, rhetoric is the art of communicating, persuasive appeals, persuasive skills.
So a lot of persuasion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, rhetorical appeals and devices,
Okay.
persuasive speaking and writing, communication using a variety of strategies.
Okay. Fabulous. All right, so we do actually have a definition for this in our glossary. If you did not know, our 2023 standards do have a glossary as an instructional resource, and these definitions were crafted specifically to align to our indicators. So in our glossary, the definition is the art of persuasive and effective communication. So it sounds a lot like what y'all were adding to the chat. Rhetoric incorporates a variety of strategies and techniques, including rhetorical appeals, which are specifically listed in our standards and indicators, and rhetorical devices, which allow speakers and writers to have specific effects on an intended audience. So I want you to pause for a second and look at this definition. Tell me, is there anything that stands out to you about this language? Maybe there was some alignment, maybe there was something there that you hadn't previously thought of. Feel free to add to the chat again if there's anything that really stands out to you about this. And I'll go ahead and add one. The art of persuasive and effective communication. Just that piece, calling it the art of. Seeing Sarah, intended audience, right? You're focusing on how do you appeal to a specific audience? Absolutely. Devices, effect on the audience. 100%, yeah. Intention is there, emphasis on the techniques. And there's that intentionality piece that's really important to note when we think about rhetoric. Yes, we have strategies. Yes, we have an audience, but it's being really intentional about how to craft that message, using those techniques specifically to have an impact on an audience. Which takes us to our next slide, which some of y'all have already kind of thought about, which is how does that definition align with what you were initially thinking? And it sounds like already there was a lot of alignment. So even if you were one of my ones or twos, previously, you're already seeing alignment to what you were thinking when it comes to rhetoric, or what you associate with rhetoric in that definition. Absolutely. All right, so how does this information then impact learning at your level or at your capacity? So think about where you're coming from, think about your specific lens, whether you're an educator, in the classroom, whether you are a content specialist or you're supporting from an administrative level. How does this information impact learning at your level? Feel free to add to the chat if anything there is already starting to rock tumble in your head.
Casey, I'll step in here to share a little personal example.
Sure.
I spent the majority of my time in the classroom, 15 years, in early childhood. And when we first started to talk about rhetoric and how it applied to the ELA standards, I needed a crash course and an education in rhetoric because I didn't feel like it applied to me so much as an elementary teacher, especially early childhood teacher. But I see so much rhetoric tied into the read alouds that I use by the type of persuasion and choices that were made by the author in those texts. So yes, rhetoric applies to us elementary teachers as well. I definitely see that at my level. So
absolutely, that's a wonderful reflection there. Absolutely. I'm seeing here it's not just about teaching the techniques, it's about the intended purpose. Right, again, it's just really being intentional about what you're saying, how you're saying it, who you're saying it to. And that's a skill that really you're building from a young age. Yeah. Oh, I'm seeing here consumers of media. Oh yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, absolutely. It's that life skill. Yeah. Maria, love what you're saying. Yeah. That building that into the middle level is there's gonna be that need for support for teachers. Absolutely. Which then takes us actually to the shifts themselves. So to give you an overview of the timeline of our standards process, you may or may not have known January of this year was when we had the final approval of our standards. And before that was a much longer process of revising those standards and then getting that full board approval. Then taking us into the spring and summer of this year, we were working on our standards introduction, providing those support materials, now into the current school year, which is what we call the year to support transition. So that's where we're rolling out our new standards through regionals, through webinars like this, through those support documents. And then finally to the 24-25 academic year, which is when these standards are fully operational and assessed. So this year, the 2015 are assessed and are still currently operational. And we're providing that support to familiarize our educators with the new standards so they are comfortable and prepared to implement them in the coming school year. So just as a reminder, you are in the year to support the transition and noting those shifts and becoming more comfortable in those shifts to prepare for that full implementation next year. So again, we noted that there were some pretty major shifts in our document, including the shift from 6 to 4 strands. So we have 4 new strands in our ELA standards, first being Foundations of Literacy, followed by Applications of Reading, Research, and Communications. And for our purposes today, we are focusing on 2 of those strands, and those are Communications and Applications of Reading. If you are still navigating that transition, I know each district is kind of in a different place. The first resource that I think could be particularly helpful for you is our ELA Standards Crosswalk, which we're going to pop in the chat and is also on the landing page. So I wanted to give you a brief overview of this as we start thinking about those shifts. So what you're going to see, and this is just one page from the crosswalk, but what you're going to see is on the crosswalk, you're going to have your standard at the top. So your current ELA standard for 2023, followed by on the left side, you're going to see the 2023 indicators and then the 2015 alignment. So this is meant to show, as you're thinking about that transition from one set of standards to the next, where there's going to be alignment or where there's going to be shifts. Additionally, you're going to note that there are some areas on the 2015 side that are crossed out, and that lets us know that that information is not aligned or is different from what you see in the 2023. And I bring this up because if you look at the ELA crosswalk, you'll note that rhetoric is included in the 2015 standards, just at a later level. It was previously introduced in 9th grade and is now shifting to the middle level. And so it's in a different place and with some slightly different language, but it is there in the 2015. So I don't want you to think there's brand new concepts here that are totally new to the standards. It's just new in a different place and in a slightly different language. And again, that's there in our landing page for you to refer to. If you want that deeper dive, you do have the entire document. But looking more specifically at the 2023, the vertical progression of spiraled standards, this is what I want to call your attention to. If you've not seen it, if you've not used it, it's a very valuable resource. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a K-12 overview of each of our indicators. So you're going to see where skills are introduced and then how they develop all the way to English 4. So in the chat, you're going to receive a PDF of just AOR 5.3, and this is where rhetoric is introduced in our new standards. So I want you to take about a minute just to take a look at it, and we're going to kind of go step by step into a few questions so that you are familiar with not only this indicator, but where we see rhetoric and why we see it and how it's supported. So take just a quick minute. Our first question is going to be, where is rhetoric now introduced in the 2023 SCCCR ELA standards? So you can either look directly on the page here, or you can look at the copy that was shared with you in the chat. And feel free to add that information to the chat once you find it. Yeah. And thank you for clarifying. Yeah, as a term. So where do we see rhetoric or rhetorical appeal used for the first time? All right. Absolutely. So y'all are right on the money. 6th grade is where rhetoric is first introduced and named. I'll say that. That's where it's named. So you see here, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but you'll notice that with the vertical progressions, new skills are introduced in bold. So when you see bold, that means it's a new piece of content or a new skill. So yes, you're going to see rhetorical appeals of Ethos, Pathos, Logos in 6th grade. But even though it's named for the first time in 6th grade, that takes us to our next question, which is how do earlier grades support the introduction of rhetoric at this new level? So again, take a look back at AOR 5.3, see where some of that foundational or support work is building up to what is introduced in 6th grade. And again, you can add this to the chat. Where are we seeing those skills providing a foundation? Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of people pointing out skills that are needed in elementary school to support that earlier learning, which again, right on the money. So if you'll click through just a little bit, yeah, you'll see some of our skills or some of our content that's introduced at the earlier levels that some of y'all have already pointed out, knowing opinions and facts, the difference versus facts and opinions, claims, evidence, argument, reasons, all of those help to provide a support for that new learning at 6th grade. Right? So we're building that foundation. It's not necessarily that it just appears, right? But we're giving it a name in 6th grade. And then looking ahead, now that we know that these skills are introduced at an earlier level, take a look forward. How does the learning at this new grade level then support learning at later grades? How are students able to go a little bit deeper into that instruction, moving past that middle level? So think about where they're going in high school. Take a look again at that 5.3, that vertical progression. All right, I'm seeing moving from identifying to explaining. Yep, the skill is going to become more nuanced. Then we're analyzing, absolutely. Critiquing multiple arguments. The validity of claims, absolutely. Oh, I love this, a snowball effect, right? So they're going to be able to go a little bit deeper. Again, some of the things that y'all have already noted, we're evaluating the effectiveness of types of reasoning. We're looking at the validity of claims, so not just identifying a claim, right? But what's the validity of it? We're comparing the development of multiple arguments. And then moving to our highest skill level, we're evaluating and critiquing multiple arguments. So those skills are much deeper, much more nuanced. So with that being said, why is this shift taking place? What is the why? And there are 3 main reasons that I want to call your attention to. First, this introduction in 6th grade matches grade level complexity. So during the revision process, the middle level writing team, and I know some of y'all from some of those different committees in the past, felt that this was a place where students could be introduced to these skills at an earlier level because they're inundated with arguments and inundated with messages from a very young age. And not only that, but these skills are going to match the complexity of the text that students are reading at that middle level. Then moving forward, this allows more nuanced instruction in high school. So again, students can go deeper into these skills. It's preparing students for, if they choose to take AP Lang, for example, that they do feel that they're comfortable in those skills before they're introduced to them in Lang. And then just moving forward, preparing them for college and career readiness, which is that third piece. And when we say college and career readiness, we're looking at rhetoric as a life skill. So again, students are inundated with information, right? Anyone who's teaching even elementary or middle level knows that kids are on social media, right? Kids are on TikTok 23 out of 24 hours of the day sometimes. And every 5 scrolls, there's a new advertisement or there's an influencer trying to sell something without saying it's an ad, right? There are commercials, there are billboards, even thinking about students moving outside of the K-12 setting, buying their first car, right? Taking out a student loan. Any of these things are going to involve arguments, information that's shared with them that they're going to have to be able to discern in order to successfully make a decision that best suits their needs. So looking at these individual skills and starting them at a developmentally appropriate level is going to help them be successful once they leave us to be able to navigate the world around them. So what does that look like in action? I know for some of you, you have experience in this content, and for others, this may be new content for you. So let's look at it in action. We're going to take about 2 minutes to look at this ad for dog food. And there are 4 questions that I want you to consider. These are in your note catcher, and you can also add them to the chat. First, what is the author trying to do with this advertisement? Why do you think this? How do you know? And then how are they doing it? So again, let's take maybe 2 minutes just to look at it. You can respond in your note catcher, and then we'll share some of our ideas from your notes. About 2 minutes. Take about 1 more minute. All right, I'm seeing some people already add that first question to the chat. If you want to go ahead and add your thoughts just on that first question, what is the author trying to do? Seeing sell dog food, promote grain-free, okay. Sell dog food, sell a product, promote a particular brand of dog food. Okay. Persuade you to, okay. All right, so I'm loving all the variety of responses here. So yeah, we could say then that the author's goal is to promote a particular type of dog food, right? But not only that, they're saying that the grain-free option is the healthier option. We may know that because of some of the combination of text and images, absolutely. And that's including things like set your dog free from grains, and then some additional stuff we could keep clicking. Yep, love them like family, feed them like family. We've got, of course, like the huge image of the dog there. Of course, it's letting us know that, you know, the dog is happy, right? It's, you know, we want to do what's best for the dog. All right, so we'll take these one at a time. So what is the author trying to do? This is our claim. Next, why do we think this? These would be our reasons. How do you know? This would be our evidence. This is everything that students are doing K-5 before that first piece is introduced. That next piece in 6th grade, which is how are they doing it, right? That's our rhetorical appeal. So all of this builds into the skills that will be introduced in 6th grade. So again, it's not that they're not doing it, right? It's just we're naming it specifically when they come to 6th grade through Ethos, Pathos, Logos. So if we go back to our ad, right? So same thing as before, we see the product, we know what they're trying to get us to do. We see some of that language here. Again, set your dog free, love them like family, feed them like family. Of course, we want to do what's best for our pet. Anyone who's a pet owner, right? You want to give them the healthiest thing, you love them, you want to do what's right for them. Which when we're thinking about a rhetorical appeal, that's pathos. That's our rhetorical appeal towards the emotion of our audience. So let's pause for a moment. We've got 3 responses on your note catcher. First, what new thinking might have emerged? How might this information impact your work? And what is one thing that you might do differently as a result of this learning? So thinking about your capacity, thinking about these 3 pieces, let's take a moment to respond on your note catcher before we add them to the chat. Oh, and for a copy of the chart, you on your landing page, you have all of these slides and you have the note catcher. So you actually have a copy of the slides, both Google and PDF form, for you to take if that is something that you would like to use in your classroom or with your educators. Yep, absolutely. Yep, we love to share. So again, take just a moment to respond on your note catcher. And as you're doing that, I'm just taking a look back through the chat. Y'all type faster than I can read, y'all. I'm seeing a lot of good stuff here. And I love seeing some of my secondary people specifically. I think some of your guidance is particularly helpful for our elementary and middle folks where this content might be new. All right, so let's hear in the chat, is there any new thinking that has emerged? Any new thinking? Oh, Mandy, I see your idea about speeches and rhetoric. Yeah, we're just looking at one example here, right? But when we think of rhetoric, when we think about arguments, we're looking at a variety of modalities. Audio from commercials. Okay, seeing there's definitely that shift, right? Those of you who are at the middle level, this is new language, right? This is new language. Oh, but we're also seeing again that vertical alignment, that there is that support built in for the elementary levels to support that new learning in middle school. The bridging of the new standards with the old, and that goes back even to the crosswalk, particularly when we're thinking about next year and we're thinking about implementation where students might not have had all of those years of that same vertical progression, that's where that crosswalk comes in handy. So we can see where has that learning been with the 2015 and where can we provide that additional support or supplement information to support where that learning is going to be in the 2023. Absolutely. Does anyone have any ideas of one thing that you might do differently as a result of what you've learned so far? I've seen a couple people mention commercials, speeches. Of course, the bridging of the new standards with the old. Oh, the anchor chart. Yeah, I think that was Mandy's. Was it you, Mandy, who mentioned it? Possibly an anchor chart in elementary school. That could be super helpful, right? Exposing students to that language early, right? They can name it, and then when they get into 6th grade, we're naming it with some slightly new information. All right. So rhetoric support document and supplemental resources. That takes us then specifically into the resources that we have to support some of this new learning and some of those shifts, in addition to the ones that we've already looked at. So part of this is going to include the instructional resources that are on our website. We will have a resource for those of you who have not navigated our website before. We'll have a resource that will be added to the landing page before the end of the day to kind of walk you through how to get to our instructional resources. But we'll go ahead and add the overall rhetoric support document to the chat, and it's also included on your landing page. So just so you know, when you go onto our webpage, you'll see under instructional resources that there's one link called rhetoric support document, and underneath there are 4 other bullets. That's because we have really 5 resources to support rhetoric. So one being the overall support document, and then the others being the supplements, which are deeper dives into some of that individual content. But we'll start with the overall support document. And we'll start with a stop and jot. So I want you to go ahead and open up that rhetoric support document that's been added to the chat. I want you to, let's say, take a minute, maybe 2 minutes, to jot down what you notice within the document. That could be what information is included, what you notice about the structure of it, anything that stands out to you, you go ahead and add to your note catcher. So 1 or so minutes to just take a look at those first 2 pages. It looks like I'm seeing a request here. Could someone put the let's see, the landing page, and then if you want to go ahead and also add the support document back also into the chat.
I'm taking care of that right now.
Thanks, Tab. All right, I'm seeing a couple of good things here. Essential vocabulary, yep. Examples of terms. Progression, absolutely. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, starting with that first section. So the rhetoric support document will begin. Oh, there we go. We'll begin with our standards that specifically relate to rhetoric. And so what you'll see is the overarching standard followed by the grade level indicators, not just 6th grade. So remember 5.3 in 6th grade, that's where rhetoric is introduced and named, but that doesn't mean that it isn't supported by the previous grades. right? Our vertical progression showed us that. So we see here actually 5th grade through English 1, because we want to see what supports are in place for that new introduction and then how that's going to support into high school. So looking at the AOR example, we're going to see the grade level indicator, essential vocabulary, and these are all terms that are defined within our glossary, and then the insights, which are different from the indicator insights, which if you look through the document already, you'll know that there are these new pieces called indicator insights. These insights are a little bit different because they are specifically crafted around rhetoric to let us know what students may have needed to do in a previous grade level, what terms they might need to be familiar with, and how learning will build off of previous grade levels. So first we see it in AOR, and then on the next slide, we'll see that same thing, but for communication 1.1, which is our standard for writing arguments. So again, same sort of structure where we have the partial grade level indicator. If you've seen the communications indicators, you know that they're a little bit longer than the AOR. So we see the parts that specifically relate to rhetoric, again with the essential vocabulary, and again with the insights. So in thinking about this, first, how is rhetoric supported in both AOR and communication strands? And then why is that important? Let's add your thoughts to the chat. You can look back again, pages 2 through 4. How is that learning supported in both of those strands, and why is that important? Or if anyone wants to unmute, love to hear someone unmute.
Casey, I'll say that as I was becoming more comfortable with rhetoric and looking in the standards document, it's so clear to see the words rhetoric used in the AOR indicators. It's obvious, right? But when you look at the communications strand, nowhere do you see rhetoric named in communications. It takes intentional, specific analysis of those communication standards and indicators to see the overlap. And Dr. Kempton, I love what you said. The AOR, yes, is that like analysis and understanding and the discovery of it, the evaluation of it, but the communications is where they produce pieces that contain rhetoric. So I just think that's so cool. It's that input output that we have. But I remember being so stunned looking at communication saying, well, rhetoric's not in there. But on an analysis, you look at that essential vocabulary, it lives in communication as well.
Yep, absolutely. So going off of what Mandy said, going off what Dr. Kempton has added to the chat, a couple of y'all are kind of circling around those same ideas, right? It's in AOR, that's students analyzing other people's arguments and other people's messages. But in communications, they're taking that a step further and they're using those same skills, supporting their own writing. And not only that, but in some of our additional communication standards, it's not only through the written pieces, but it's through presentations. So thinking about speakers and speeches, thinking about multiple modalities, and again, that input and output. You're listening to speakers and you're evaluating their messages and how they're saying what they're saying, and then using those same strategies in creating your own messages. And you will notice if you go back to the AOR, you'll see the essential vocabulary between the communications and the applications of reading is essentially going to be the same because we're using that same content just in different ways. All right. The next piece here that I'll just go over fairly quickly on the rhetoric support document is going to be the section on the rhetorical appeals. So again, this is new learning for our middle level teachers. And so what we have in the rhetoric support document is just a quick definition of each of the terms, ethos, pathos, and logos, and then some additional supporting information And for teachers who want that deeper dive into ethos, pathos, logos, or the graphic representation, which is the rhetorical triangle, we have 2 supplements for those. So we have the rhetorical triangle supplement and the ethos, pathos, logos supplement. So those were 2 of those bullets that were on that initial instructional resources page. Next, we have tracing an author's argument. So in 5th grade, students begin tracing an author's argument. And so in order to do that, they have to understand claims, reasons, and evidence. In 6th grade, the term alternative perspective is introduced in addition to those terms. And then in 7th grade, that term is going to shift to counterclaim. So we have this here to provide an overview of what claims, reasons, and evidence are, examples, and then any additional insights there to support that learning. All right, so consider your lens. Again, I know that we have some teachers here at each of the grade bands. We have some content specialists, we have some administrators. I want you to think about your specific lens, and this will be on your note catcher. So first, where do your learners fit into the puzzle? And I say learners because that could be students, that could be your adult learners. Where do they fit into this puzzle as we're thinking about rhetoric? Then, how does earlier learning support that level? How will instruction at your level support the next stage of learning? Let's pause on these for about 3 minutes. So take about 3 minutes to consider your lens. So your learners, earlier learning, next stages of learning. About 3 minutes to jot down your thoughts. This is on your note catcher. And again, feel free to add your response into the chat, or if someone does want to unmute, any of these things that stand out to you that you would like to respond to. So where your learners might fit in, how does earlier learning support your level?
Good morning.
Hello.
Hey, this is Sandra and Dylan Four. I presented something this morning about the standards, 4 different ways, and we're using all this. And I use the AOR5 and this very same stuff, and we talked about it. So it's a combination of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers. And the 8th grade teachers are like, okay, we've done this. And felt a little bit better about it. But we had the conversation about within the school what we could do 8th grade supporting 6th and 7th. We also had the questions about K through 5, which feed into us for next year. I'm doing some district level training, so this is helping me plan for those different audiences, and I'm taking a lot of notes so I can use this
Absolutely.
in a few weeks about the different lens and how to prepare and what's going on.
Okay.
But I think this is the one shift that a lot of people are worried about.
It can be a little bit scary if you've
Mhm.
not been familiar with this language before.
Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But we know kids can do this. We know kids can do this. They're doing it already. They're just not using they just don't know they're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what we've been trying to share with the field is that we're just naming it, right? We're giving it a name and we're being more intentional about where we name it. But yes, these are skills that students are familiar with, just maybe in a different place with a different name. And that's where that crosswalk comes in as an especially useful resource if you're trying to see, well, where did we do this before? How did we do it before? And where can I provide that support?
Thank y'all.
Yeah. Oh, I
Hi,
just saw something.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, this is Dr. Brockington. I particularly like the direction that this set of standards is going in, especially with the idea that I have taught middle school.
Mhm.
I am now a high school, but I also am a college level instructor as well. And students come to me from high school not knowing ethos, pathos, logos, not understanding claim and counterclaim. And I do believe that part of what had been the breakdown is that our elementary, middle, high, and so forth were not using the terms of the standards. And so now being more explicit with what the terms are and having definitions and having examples will help push people to push teachers, push students to learn those terms, to actively and intentionally, as you said, employ those terms in order to be more effective communicators. So I really do like that this shift has happened and that it is very intentional at each grade level. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll say I was a high school English teacher, and knowing now that students are going to be familiar with those concepts in middle school and they're preparing for that learning at high school, it made my teacher heart so happy that I'm like, I can do those deeper dives now. We can be much more nuanced. And like some of you were saying, these are skills that students are doing. We're just naming them, right? We're just using the academic language. And Dr. Adams even saying sixth graders love to argue, kindergartners love to argue. Children love it, but we're just being much more intentional about how we name those skills. And then just thinking before we move forward about shifts in instruction that need to take place to ensure that these pieces fit together, that's where I encourage everyone to go back to our supports and particularly back to that vertical progression so you can see what's come before and what will come after. All right. So let's do a quick stop and jot. What information from the rhetoric support document do you think will be the most impactful in your work or your support of others' work? So again, we've just taken a look at just that one piece, the overall support document, not the supplements, but just the overall support. So thinking in what we've looked at so far, which piece of that do you think is going to be the most impactful in your capacity? I see essential vocab. I'm loving that y'all are pulling out the academic vocabulary, y'all. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the glossary yet, I do a shameless plug on the glossary as much as I can, because it is aligned to the language of our indicators. Oh, the examples for sure. Yeah. All right. So we're going to walk through this next section. This is something that I definitely encourage you to do as a follow-up or a deeper dive, but we'll walk you through it because I know that we're a little bit short on time. So the rhetoric support supplements, those are those bullet points that are underneath the overall rhetoric support document. And these are those deeper dives into that content. So teachers that need that deeper dive into ethos, pathos, logos, the rhetorical triangle, they have sort of a pull